Welcome officially to Three Keys to Pitching Today's Business Sermon with literary agent Lucinda Halpern. I'm so delighted to have her here today. She has a new book out, Get Signed, which you're going to hear about. Okay, one more thing before I turn things over. I just want to thank this month's sponsor, which is the Breakthrough Writers Bootcamp. If you are struggling with a manuscript that is not getting the responses you would like from agents or publishers, you might want to check out this program. You can find out more at breakthroughwriters.com. I'm very appreciative of their support. All right, so a little bit about Lucinda, and then I'll let her fill you in on some of the detail. She is a literary agent at Lucinda Literary. She began her career at one of the big five publishers, HarperCollins, in the publicity department. She began her literary representation career at Fletcher and Company, which is a well-known agency. And one of the reasons she's here with us today is that one of her books, or I don't, is it your first book, Lucinda?
It's my first book, so here it
Okay,
is. Yes,
congratulations.
thank
So
you.
it just launched, Get Signed. So I am going to stop sharing my slides so that Lucinda can take over and begin her presentation.
Yeah. Well, this is so wonderful. I'm a huge admirer of Jane's, so I'm so happy to be here and meet new writers today. I am curious, of course, because we're only about a week and a half into this launch. If you have already ordered or started reading the book, Get Signed, Find an Agent, land a book deal, and become a published author, or started listening to it on audio, I'd love to hear that in the chat. It just, it just makes, it's just a wonderful feeling to see that this message is starting to resonate. And then by the end, we'll see if you are inclined to read more. This is sort of I would say a preview, but also really intended to give you valuable tips that the book will then later explore. So I'll just start talking about my background and then I'll give you guys the presentation you came for. Again, it's a presentation I developed just for Jane and her group. So I hope you enjoy it. So name is Lucinda Halpern. And I also try to tell the story in a way that is relevant to writers. I that's the focus here because I could go on and on about my own story, but it starts at the beginning with being an aspiring writer myself. So living in the actual Parisian garret apartment, trying to make a living as a memoirist, submitting short stories and essays and struggling as a poet, until my Parisian friends said, "This is really tough for you. And I think that you'd like working in business. Aren't you from New York City? Why don't you go back, live in New York, and try your odds working in publishing?" So they gave me that brilliant idea. So I put the dream of being a writer aside for the moment, and I went out and got a job at HarperCollins. As a literary fiction lover, I of course wanted to work as an editorial assistant. And one of my mentors, Dan Halpern, maybe some of you know the name or not, he was an entrepreneur himself. He'd started Echo Press, which was later bought by a good sum by HarperCollins. And he said, "You can't get in through the front door, so get in through the side door." What he meant by that was, if you want to work in editorial, try this other department, publicity, because they have a door that's open. And I think that was such a great line that I recommend to writers in their querying process that, and as you'll learn in the book, which is supposed to be totally myth busting and unconventional, you don't need to follow the rules often. And sometimes being a rule breaker, being more creative and unconventional in your approach to getting an agent's attention is exactly the way in. So that's how I landed the first job at the boot camp that is HarperCollins. And we'll fast forward. Went to join the literary agency Fletcher and Company. Why that's relevant is I knocked on every single agent's door and I didn't have any list of authors to guarantee. And I found one agent who would give me a chance. And I tell writers every day, it just takes one person to believe in you. She believed in me and my whole life changed. I started working with Gretchen Rubin, who's the author of Happiness Project, among others, when Gretchen was just starting to build her own platform. And I took careful notes. I learned a lot. And I wanted to start a company, which I was always born to do, um, uniting this interesting world of online marketing and the media sort of sensibility that I'd gained at working from HarperCollins with this ultimate goal. of working editorially with authors and making careers for them. And, I think we are in the business of dreams, of making dreams come true. So I started Lucinda Literary in now 13 years ago in 2011, and we've been pivoting all along the way. Without taking you too much into that, we started a speakers bureau in 2016 as a service to our authors who were tired of not getting paid lecture gigs, which, by the way, many fiction and nonfiction authors are capable of doing, but they often need that third-party support and representative to elevate their fees and to, help them make a livelihood doing it. And then during the pandemic, we started giving a number of online courses. I was doing it from like my dimly lit child's bedroom in quarantine, found that there was such an audience and need for this that I began to think about self-publishing a book called Get Signed, that sort of bottled up all of the shorthand, the strategies, the secrets I was giving to these writers in a room, as well as what I'd learned from working with so many best-selling authors over the years. So plan to self-publish that. Again, I'm trying to make this relevant. I was perfectly okay with self-publishing this book when I was out to dinner with a friend who works at Hay House, now Penguin Random House. And third glass of wine in, I said, you know what, I'm just going to tell her about this little baby book I've been working on. And she said, don't self-publish that. We want to commission it. The lesson to that story is you tell everyone you know. Don't keep your writing or any hobby, passion, pursuit that you're working on close to your vest. You never know what door is going to open for you, what connection you're going to make, or when someone will see potential in your idea when even you didn't. So I always, I took a lot away from that experience and that gift of finding a publisher. And now I'm acting as the guinea pig. I'm creating the playbook for authors and writers at large about how to do this thing, which is so difficult, which it takes so much time and work, but is ultimately so creatively rewarding and such a game changer for your career and your business. And it's the sort of thing I always said to authors, it was like kind of hot air. And now I'm the living proof, right? I'm the living proof that this is having a book published by a publisher is a totally game-changing, rewarding, and all-encompassing thing. So yes, thank you for all of those who are buying it. If you have questions on my background, I guess what I should say about what we represent at Lucinda Literary. So in addition to those unconventional things we do, like courses and consultations and speaking for our authors, we of course represent authors just as a traditional agency would. We're particularly drawn to books by entrepreneurs, to books by PhDs or sort of research-backed in some way books, um, popular science, personal development, formerly known as self-help, uh, big idea books of any kind, which also, as I teach and Get Signed, and we'll talk about a little bit here, apply to novels, apply to children's books, apply to genre books. Um, and I'll explain a little more what I mean, but those are the sorts of books I represent. So without further ado, let me share my screen if that's okay by everyone. Jane, I can't see you any longer, but is that good by you?
That sounds great. I'm here.
Great, great. And since you so kindly dropped the name of my agency, this is also the new website for those who have ordered the book separately, a whole host of bonuses, because what I didn't say about this book is I interviewed people like Jane, along with a number of, really seasoned editors, top agents in New York, and best-selling authors like Adam Grant and Mike McAllowitz, and my own author, Chris Bailey, and a number of others in the fiction space. And I didn't want writers to take my word for it. I wanted to actually vet my ideas with the colleagues I do business with every day. And some really motivating things that were imparted to me is everyone, no matter how many years into their career, they're still finding first-time authors in their slush pile. So this notion that, serious agents and editors, publishers don't take on first-time authors is like, whoosh, it happens every day, and we get major deals for them, and people are excited by promising new talent. So anyway, enough about that. That's the book. If you've bought it separately through Jane's Promotions, go there and we'll give you the bonuses nonetheless. Get signed, find an agent, land a book deal, and become a published author. Rule number one, the title, especially for nonfiction, should tell you everything you need to know, right? It should tell you everything you need to know to a reader, to the media. It makes the pitch to the publisher about this small. They can get the concept right away. Obviously, harder to do for fiction, but titles are really important. Okay, so what's your big idea? Um, this I was talking about a little bit, that many people think of it. First of all, many people don't know what it means at all. So maybe I have my unique definition of what this is, but many people think of this as applying only to a certain type of nonfiction. That's not how we think of it. And how publishers, I would say, think of it. What we mean by it is, how does this feel or look like something new and differentiated enough to find its place in the market or on a crowded shelf? Because it's just like music, about every book has been done before. So how are you going to make yours stand out on the surface level? The way that I've tried to break down what we mean by big idea is through two necessary conditions. And it's really sort of four of them disguised as a two-part methodology. Has a universal theme and a unique point of view, and it is timely and timeless. Importantly, it's not why you decided to write the book, it's about what you serve for a reader. So I've been posting on social media like wild, something I didn't like to do in the past. Um, and what I was saying in one of my posts was, just as relates to your pitch letter, which we'll get to later on, is if anything that is not directed at the reader for that book, for that pitch, should be taken right out of your pitch. So it's a very easy way of skimming and sharpening and using the limited real estate you have to sort of, to really think about like what can stay and what can go. We'll get into those two conditions in a minute, but I think people find it's sort of fun and informative um, to see why we would even think an idea is small. And I actually named some really common examples that we see time in, time out. Again and again. I talk about those in Get Signed, but Lucinda Literary as a smaller agency, we've got four other agents and a few other people who aren't working as assistants or in marketing. Um, that's a small agency, and we were receiving before this launch about 50 queries a day. So you can imagine a larger agency with 20 agents is receiving even more. So, that surface level pitch is so important. And when we spot a big idea, we go for it. When we spot something that's small, that seems very familiar, is the other term you might hear. So now you know what it actually means. Then it's sort of an immediate pass. So what I mean by a small idea is you haven't surveyed an audience. Maybe this is pretty accessible. This means that you were in the ivory tower, you were writing your great American novel, and you then said, I'm going to send this out to agents because my mother thinks it's great. That is not surveying a wide enough audience to see where can how can you kick the tires of this idea? Where are there gaps that you need to fill? Where does the editing need to be stronger? Because for many of you who are fiction writers, it probably behooves you to have an editor even before you go to agents, unless you are sort of a writer by trade and very confident in your writing abilities. A lack of focus, we can sort of see clutter on the page, and everyone wants something crisp and clear, that, in the language of publishers, is an easy get, right? We were talking about the title of Get Signed is like, it's an easy get what this is. So take out anything that's sort of taking us in a different direction where you don't really have the space to explain it, because you don't have a lot of space to explain in your query letter the way you would in a conversation. And a query letter is a conversation opener. It's the way to get into a conversation. You haven't done your market research. In the book, we talk about the four types of writers who get book deals. It's a very fun little concept that people seem to be gravitating toward. The data collector type, and I'm sure one of the questions is going to end up being, what are the four types of writers? So we can answer that later. But the data collector type that I hope every author leaving this becomes is the person who does the market research, which is as simple as going into Amazon, looking at the books that are like yours, typing in keywords that, speculative fiction, the word that I've just learned, love and loss, like whatever it is, um, whatever theme it is that you're exploring, you are seeing, and it's not just Amazon, right? You're on social media potentially, you're paying attention, you're talking to booksellers, which I've found to be like a rich resource for understanding what's selling. I've been doing this for my own book, trying to understand like really having long conversations with them if you're not an online person. There's various ways to find out what's selling in your category and not to fit a round peg in a square hole, if that's what the expression is, not to just try to meet create something for the market. Because I don't know about you, but I always want to honor what a creative wants to do with their work. It's not about just creating something to please the market, but you do have to sort of know your fit in the market. Another idea, your audience appears too niche. So, gosh, so many examples, but many of them are more in the nonfiction space where you're writing for academics, or you're writing for lawyers, or you're writing for health insurance professionals, and you just haven't thought about how this is broadly applicable. If that's the case, you don't need an agent whose livelihood is singly created by deals that they do with the bigger publishers that try to sell books into the thousands and thousands of people. Next up, you haven't thought critically about your credibility, your expertise, or presented it well. Um, there's so many fiction writers in the room. Platform, which is a whole other conversation. The rules are different for you, but there still is a way that you can be showing your writing chops in your pitch. So if that comes up today, or if that comes up in another class we do together, we can do that. Okay. So getting at those two conditions, the universal theme and the unique point of view, this is just refreshing you on some of the themes that we see time and time again, the familiar tropes that a publisher says, got it. For the memoirists in this room, of which I saw many, you know, you've got to tie to a theme that is beyond the story that is important for you to tell, often for your own catharsis, often because it's a family history and you're contributing to a legacy. And all of those are really valid. But if you haven't pulled out what that universal theme is, you are jeopardizing your chances as a new writer. Your unique point of view. So, the way I really like to think about fiction and nonfiction is surprise. What is surprising? Is it a surprising twist? Is it a surprising ending? If you're writing nonfiction, how are you flipping a common belief? How are you saying something that is counterintuitive? I mean, the whole book of Get Signed is supposed to be that. It's supposed to like tell you to scrap everything you know, and here's how we're going to reinvent the query process in terms of what agents actually want to see. How does your pitch demonstrate popular appeal but contribute something new and different? So once you've written your query letter, take out your check. Hopefully you'll read the book and you'll have the actual checklist of like, did I do this? Did I do that? Did I do this? And it will act as a roadmap. Platonic is an example in the book. We will move on just to save time here for the Q&A, which is what you really wanted to get to. So is your idea timely? What are those around you talking about? Is there a trend that conversations can capture? What's the point of contention? Where can you lend a unique slant? So for journalists, this is always taught, right? But I would say for novelists, just the same. You want to you don't be afraid to be controversial. Those topics that are just too soft don't break into the market in a really in a way that media can get behind. And something I talk about in the book is that agents have to think like editors. Editors have to think like the media. Media has to think like readers. And all of these are connected back to the reader. So I know I just threw a lot out at you that isn't in this presentation, but end goal, we're thinking about how the media will get behind you as a new author, or even as an author who's formerly published in a new book. What are those talking points? How is this going to be shown as current? What are books in your genre that everyone is avidly discussing? And any combination of these data points will lead you toward the timeliness factor for your book. So just a quick example. I gave a presentation at the Center for Fiction on Monday. There were at least two gentlemen in the room writing about plots that took place in the 1980s, 1960s, and even dating to before that. And I thought, okay, like my first question as an agent is, why are we in that time zone? Besides the fact that that's when you grew up, what is relevant? How are we connecting this to a reader today? What is important about it taking place during that time period? So just even be aware of small but important details, that even the name of a character, if the character's name is no longer, really being used. There was another sort of older woman in one of our classes that was using a name of a character that I hadn't, heard except my grandmother used. And I thought, I just want to be constructive and have you think about changing the name. And it might make a critical difference. So those are the sorts of details. I hope that's helpful and not offensive. Okay. Is your idea timeless? Have you incorporated those universal themes? Are there similar books to yours published years ago but still being discussed? Obviously, comparative titles, widely misunderstood topic. I get into them a lot and get signed. Won't have time in this presentation, but using comp titles is incredibly important. And really think about ones that are still being currently discussed or published in the last 2 to 5 years. Does your book move someone to rethink a current belief or take an action? We could read a beach read and our thinking could be changed. So I think the best fiction does that. The best nonfiction definitely does. Could someone buy this book years down the line and still be touched by its story? All right. Here are some examples we won't have too much time to go into. Love talking about this series because Jane is a self-published author who became a massive success. We got her a 4-book deal with HarperCollins. Now she's writing her first standalone novel that wasn't in the self-published trilogy, and has a TV series on the way, and just sort of, really a success story. And I was very honored and lucky to work with her. Ditto, a very different example, Dan Martell, who is, whose book became a bestseller because he created this really cool concept, which was to buy back your time, how to value your time, and how to, how the entrepreneurs that he taught were struggling so hard to clone themselves, and they couldn't. So how do you value your time and how do you delegate it appropriately? Okay, I don't know how we're doing on time, but we will try to. All of you, by the way, can have access to this presentation, so we won't have time to go through every single point. But what agents bring to your book, for those of you who are like, well, what do they do anyway? We're not just real estate brokers. With all fondness to real estate brokers, my brother is one, but we're not just brokering a deal. We are your editorial partners first and foremost, your first champions. We share your vision. We honor your vision. These are the best of agents. I always say, if you meet an agent who just says, there's nothing to edit here, I'm going to take this out to market, it's like, you might think twice about signing with that agent, because, there's always improvement to be learned through a partnership. We're your career strategists. We're the doulas when you can't trust the doctor, and we're the champions long before and after the book deal. Where to look? Again, Get Signed gets into this quite a good deal, so we won't go too granular with it, but there are a lot of different ways to think about where to look. I mean, the most common being look at the acknowledgments of of a book, and of a similar book that you love, a book that's inspired you, so that you can write that personal letter, because no one likes to feel slush. That's the quickest way to end in the proverbial slush pile, is if someone feels like you've just written a form letter because you're that desperate. It's not what I recommend doing. Again, here's some other things that you'll have access to, but these are really important points in terms of even going about finding the right person for you. And again, for those who are brand new to the world of publishing, literary agents are integral to the process, not just for all of the reasons I just went over, but because publishers don't often take unsolicited submissions. They imagine, if they didn't have agents, we talked about how many we're receiving, they would be absolutely inundated with pitches. So they trust gatekeepers. They trust the taste that they know and the relationships they've built for over years to bring them the best material. what to do when you aren't getting a response. Again, I'm going to let you go through this more in the book. I'm realizing that I'm giving a lot of content away from the book, but I promise you'll find more. I think that, there are, I guess the bottom line, if you're reading this slide, is like, you cannot just let your query die on the vine. Your book is too important. Hopefully, this presentation, this book leaves you feeling motivated, like you have something to stand behind, because you have probably spent years, or at least months putting together a book proposal or a book. So you've got to follow up so people take you seriously. And then your next question is going to be like, well, the agency says not to follow up. Okay, okay. Well, so does media, and so do the publishers we work with, and so do, anyone you're working with in the world, says, don't call us, we'll call you. But sometimes they didn't receive the pitch to begin with. So the worst you could get is a no or a no response, which was where you already were, right? Okay, write the perfect query letter. Again, without a sense of time, I want to get to questions, but a lot of rules here that are in the book, but I've sort of tried to, synthesize and synopsize them here. A query letter, first and foremost, is a brief email to introduce yourself and your book to a literary agent. It is supposed to seduce them into requesting to read your work with the ultimate goal of representing it. The seduction analogy is a fun one because this is a relationship. This is potentially a marriage. And you want to, I always say, what is the first thing you're going to do when you get a pitch and you're actually interested in that person? You're going to Google them. You wouldn't go on a blind date with someone you haven't Googled. So, that visibility on Google is important. And that's part of the platform section of the book, but I think it's a really critical takeaway. People have sort of said, aha, so I need to have a Google footprint. Absolutely, 1000%. If you have nothing else, you need to create a website or have someone sort of feature you in some way, because if you're invisible on Google, hard to make the case that thousands of people in throngs are going to buy your book. Submitting a query, remember that concision is key. So I'm all about brevity, less is more. We will request more information from you if we want it. Eliminating guesswork for the reader by clearly introducing your book's genre as well as comparative titles. This is one of the more revelatory points that I make and get signed, and that, again, I've just sort of like come to learn over the years, which is that in the vein of making the work easy for an agent and for an editor. What your editor is going to do if they want to acquire the book is they are going to have to be a salesperson for you and get in front of their editorial boards, because these are decisions by committee, and they're going to have to present your work. So if you can give them exactly what they need to later write the jacket copy and the Amazon description in your pitch letter, think about how far ahead of the game you are. So instead of paying attention to the granular rules of each agency template, which could just be mind-boggling, and I have so many writers saying like, well, can the word count be 301 or 300, or can I mention this comma? Can I do this thing? And I'm like, okay, we're focused on the wrong things. Big idea. What's in it for the reader? How are you hooking me? Is this pitch ultimately the movie trailer for your movie? Because for those novelists who are in the room and for those memoirists in the room, we are reading your book for the screen, right? That's the long life, that's the long tail in your book. So it's got to just feel that riveting. So think about your movie trailer. Write your query like an Amazon description. So I talk about the 5 W's in the book: the who, what, where, when, why. And I think that that's an important concept, because while it seems so elementary and may have been taught to you in some way in writing school, if you ever did a formal education in writing, people don't actually include it in their pitch letter, which leaves an agent like wondering, what actually happened in this book? Where does it take place? And these are just questions, again, to make it a really easy formula for you to follow. Okay, we're not going to have a ton of time to go through this, but if you go through this checklist, which again you'll have at the end of this in email, you're going to figure out, even in the what I call the elevator pitch, which is a whole section in the book, because I really believe that getting this right verbally, orally is what's going to help you best say it in your written pitch. And it's just great practice, right? Because what's NPR going to ask you when they have you on the show? What's your book about? So if you feel like you need to babble about a dozen plot points, it's probably too cluttered. It's probably unfocused. Did you address the critical why this book now? Did you struggle to distill a main takeaway for the reader into a sentence? Again, takeaways, like big ideas, apply to novels, memoirs, and other sorts of nonfiction. It's like, what do you want a reader to rethink or to feel upon leaving your book? That would be important to include in your pitch, right? Can you put your book in under a minute? Well, that's really applicable only to the elevator pitch I was talking about verbally. But, reading your query letter orally is an excellent exercise. I read my whole audio book, or at least I tried to before before I got a little tired of hearing my own voice. But I tried to read that manuscript before I recorded the audiobook and before I submitted the manuscript to catch those tongue tripping moments because the way we read on the page is the way we're reading in our head, right? So it's a really it's something you don't think to do, like read your query letter aloud to someone else. And that element of surprise is so critical. Quick anatomy of a query letter. Again, this is the Lucinda Literary sort of template of what we like to see. We have a submissions form that we have worked hard to make incredibly easy, both for you to submit and for us to review, making it easier on both sides. We don't believe in all these complicated red tape, processes that other agencies have. These are the components that we want to see. And if the agencies that you're querying don't sort of point you in these directions, take this as a template for what you should try to include within the confines of their template. So it's that one line personal introduction. It can be just a line. It could be more. It could be more like a love letter. If you are just querying a few agents, the title, the genre, the elevator pitch, which we talked about as sort of like, if we were in an elevator together, what could you say about your book in just a couple of sentences and have it be really clear? The credentials or platform, if you bring any to the table, the comps or comparative titles, the differentiation, what I call the wow factor, like how is this new and different? It's the thing that's going to linger with an agent or an editor and have them contact you the next day. And then the call to action, I'm not, a lot of people have found this particularly surprising as I've been giving these talks. The idea that you should just say, let me know if you'd like to see chapters is kind of okay, I'll let you know, along with all the other 49 writers. I think that if you can find a way to express um, some urgency, and we have a lot of kind of strategy in the book. The book is disguised as how to write a query letter. It's actually about how to create the foundation for a great book, because that's what's going to ultimately get an agent a book deal is a great book. And also how to think like an agent and self-advocate like an agent. So that's what we do as agents. We don't say, let me know. We create some urgency. We create some momentum. So anyway, I'll leave you with two conditions that I think are different from what you've probably read or heard online. Whole book is about leading with your strengths. Talk about the four types of writers who get book deals. Each of these types, which everyone has at least one, has a strength, and you've got to sort of let that guide you. So if it is your massive social media platform, that's where you open. If it is the fact that you've got these comps you really feel are very foolproof, and sort of like create a really interesting picture. Sometimes comps, by the way, can be a podcast or a movie or, a popular series. It doesn't have to just be a book. And in fact, I recommend that people do take other examples from out of pop culture mediums, because editors and agents are, just like you are, watching and reading in all of these mediums. Sometimes you are the asset. And two, closed with a call to action. So this is your chance to capture an agent's attention. Share, these are again, just some tactics. I have more in the book, but certainly we're competitive people. So if you do have an offer, you should share that. You should update with that. If you've had multiple requests even, can raise an eyebrow. Like, okay, well, this person is getting quick response. Again, this is just what agents do. Indicate if someone notable has endorsed, edited, or stands behind your project. You might choose comps to show that there's a ready appetite for your work. Better if the comps are even represented by the agency, where you get the sense that they would represent those titles and maybe are looking for their next Glennon Doyle or their next Hyper Focus or their next Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. Heart, motivation, and personality, like your willingness to collaborate, can go a long way. At Lucinda Literary, we sign up people. The books are secondary. I need to work with a great person. And this was echoed in the interviews I did with editors. It's, do I want to be in a long-term business with this person? And there actually is a way to convey personality on the page, right? And I think that being confined by a really formal and rote structure that you think you need to do is actually not the way forward. It's using the sensibility of your own voice, your own content, and your book that people really get excited about. All right, so go get signed. This again is the book. We've got lots of free resources at getsignedbook.com. We've got a free newsletter that has like a workbook companion, a submission tracker. These are bonuses. If you've already ordered the book, you can still submit through this bonus portal and get access to all of these video interviews that I took with people for the book that like they really divulge what they're learning and what they're seeing. And I just think that's an incredible opportunity. And then here's a lot of links for you. This is me on all social media platforms. This is the free author training kit I was talking about that puts you on our email list, the Get Signed site, and the Lucinda Literary site. I'll close my screen now, but again, we are an unconventional agency to say the least, and we're trying to educate and touch and impact as many writers as possible to give them all the best shot possible, because I was frankly pretty sick of no one navigating writers through this business and people not getting seen and heard. And I think there's a real hunger and need for it. And, I hope you find the book informative and that it provides that value to you. So anyway, enough of me. Let's hear from you.
Thank you so much, Lucinda. That was very generous, all of the information that you shared. And there's so much gratitude in the chat and people going off to buy your book this very second. So that's excellent.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to start with the most upvoted questions, and I encourage people attending, if there's a question you see in the Q&A that you would really like to see answered live, go and upvote it because we might not have time to get to all of these. So starting with Stacy's question, as an agent, how do you feel about contests by literary journals that feature first chapters or novel excerpts? Is it a good idea to try and snag an agent's or publisher's attention? And does it become a rights nightmare?
A rights nightmare if they win a contest for something that the person might want to republish in the book. Interesting. I mean, I say to the first point that there is no downside that I can tell. Even people who query us with an award I've never, a contest, I've never heard of, already have captured my attention with they've won an award. So I think that that's a really great idea. And as far as I'm concerned, like the New York Times has its stipulations around what the New Yorker. I've not heard of a contest saying that we have ownership over your IP and you can't publish it. I'd be really surprised if that were the case, but I appreciate that sophisticated question.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you. I always recommend writers look at the read the contest guidelines and terms and conditions closely. But most of them, if it's a first chapter contest, they're hoping that you're going to get that publishing deal. So, okay. Next question is from Joanne, who says, I'm reading Get Signed and found the chapter on discovering your book's big idea, timeless and timely, super useful. However,
Yay, thank you. Uh-oh. I
however,
want a clarification. Yes, let's hear it.
I'm not quite sure what to do with this new clarity on my book's themes since it doesn't seem to fit into the traditional query letter formula. How do I gracefully work this into my query?
Yeah, I mean, I'd given an example. Gosh, this is the sort of situation where it's like, I want to hear more about your book so I can guide you. It's sort of, difficult just off the cuff to speak to this particular theme, pitch, and book. But I I mean, comps are going to be a great way to prove the timeliness, right? Because if books just, I always say publishing is a lookalike business. And if your book looks like something else that is very successful, it's proving already that there's timeliness to it. So I don't know if this person is writing a novel or writing nonfiction, because sometimes it can be easier in nonfiction to, state that this conversation's going on social media. But I would say right now, diversity and inclusion remains the order of the day. So stories that have been underrepresented, um, little known worlds, which, can again, like everyone is just interested in exploring what hasn't been seen or heard. To me, that's a timeliness factor. So if there's something about a character of yours that has any of these elements of what is au courant in literature and novels, it's like, why wouldn't you, if you include that, you don't have to say this is timely, this is
Mhm.
timeless, right?
Mhm.
And then the universal theme should be apparent. The universal apparent should really be in your synopsis.
Yeah,
I hope that helps.
it
That's
does.
the
Yes.
problem with the book, that we can't meet in the room. And I mean, I do that at my company, but it's hard to, to work with you in that way when the book is the starting off point.
So this is a similar question. Can you give an example of the wow factor?
Yeah. So great. I will give the example that I love to give, which again is this Black Girls Must Die Exhausted series. And why did that have the new and different appeal, which is what I mean by the wow factor? Uh, Jane was writing a book. So the book itself, if you're not familiar with it, is sort of a romantic comedy. But previously, all she had seen was white women having fun. And she hadn't seen anything that just had sort of the levity and the fun and the humor, but also grappling with real life topics, grappling with race to to a lesser degree, grappling with infertility. So there were heavier concepts, but with this light touch. And so when that landed on my desk, I thought, wow, this title is just it's a heart stopper. So no doubt about that. I had to pick it up and read it. And that's the beauty of a great title. But then it had this kind of element of like, oh, that's kind of, it works, right? Like this next book that she's writing that I'm so excited about publishing over the holidays is just like that movie with Kate Winslet and Cameron Diaz, the Holiday. I think it's called The Holiday, where they switch up apartments, right? So it's familiar to us, it is proven, it is known, but these are, there are Black characters in this, so it's like a different take. It's a different sort of, it's a different sort of unique perspective. So that's an example for you, but I have plenty more.
All right, switching gears a little bit to the mechanics of length. So Mishi is wondering how long is the pitch, and when she says pitch, she probably means maybe the story description. She's heard from 20 words to a paragraph or two. What do you say?
So yeah, I'm curious if we're talking about the query letter or the synopsis.
And just to clarify, by
Yeah.
synopsis, you mean the story description inside the query,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And that's also been a topic of confusion, and I don't want it to be a topic of confusion, right? It's like, remember, the pitch is not what this is about, it's why we care. So that's a really different and important spin.
Yeah.
Um, so to answer on length, I said less is more, the briefer the better. Some agencies will request, especially if they've specialized in fiction, a synopsis in addition to your pitch. And then they might have their own guidelines.
Mhm.
Since I don't do that, I can't really speak to what those like length qualifications are. But but I would say that in a pitch letter, if you're talking about the story description within the pitch, I do not want that to exceed 2 paragraphs, and I'd be even happier if it were just one.
Yeah.
Because the rest of it should really be selling the concept, selling the why this book now and why you're positioned to write it, which is different than what happens in the story.
Yes. Great. Jen asks, would it be recommended to indicate in the query letter that an author I studied with has offered to blurb my book? But she adds the caveat that this particular person is not writing in the same genre.
I had this question come up the other day. So it's all strategic, right? Don't think of this as a form letter. That's the first thing. Don't think of this as a form letter. Think of this as a letter you are going to take to people that you care about, that you want to be in business with. So, what that means for you is choose this person if that's going to be relevant to the agent that you're pitching. If that endorsement is going to be meaningful, maybe they won't know who she is, and then like let's forget about it. Maybe they represent that person and they'll be very excited. I wouldn't say there is no one size fits all for that response to that question. But I think it's a great thing to have an endorsement from any sort of well-recognized author. And I commend you for going out and doing that because it's something that our authors have done really successfully, which is
Mhm.
elicit those blurbs even before they get agents.
Right. Taylor wonders, you mentioned the Google footprint, and she's wondering about any difference between fiction writers and nonfiction when you're looking at that Google footprint.
Yeah. We offer a course on this and a lot of coaching because marketing is like, whoa, there is a chapter called Get Seen and Get Signed, which does try to like boil down what is essential for fiction and what is essential for nonfiction. And I guess I can relieve you of the false notion that you do not need a million TikTok followers, especially as a novelist. So just to be particular to this Google footprint, you know, a novelist, it's like your best asset is to just create a simple website. You don't have to spend money doing it. You can create one yourself. It can be really bare bones, but you get to curate what people are looking at. So an agent, first thing we're going to do when we're interested in you is Google you. Give us at least your website if you have nothing else. The other thing you can do though is you can really be trying to submit. Every writer here should be doing this of any kind, like submitting your content to other publications. Jane, you know this as well as I do. It's try to get those links back to your work and that recognition so that when people are Googling you, there is something to show for it.
Yeah. You're speaking my language on the author website piece. I always try to tell people, please think about it before your book comes out.
Way before. Right? I mean, please don't make this amateur error in your book proposal. Like, I will build a website. I will do publicity. I will go on a book tour. Like, basically, if my publisher gives me a contract, this is a different world. A decade ago, that worked. Now they expect you to have that done before you enter into a book deal. So that's a really critical thing to remember.
All right, switching gears a bit. This is about memoir.
Okay.
Heidi has heard two things. You can send a book proposal, or you should have the entire manuscript complete before approaching an agent.
Yeah. Memoir is so murky. I have to go interview 20 more people on memoir. I'm being serious.
Yeah,
Um,
it's tough.
because at Lucinda Literary, we prefer the book proposal. Why? Because I want to have this is the less is more, make my life easy. I can't read a manuscript that I'm interested in just off the cuff. I need to know that there's like a lot more to just the great writing itself.
Mhm.
Um, so the book proposal gives me that vision, that promise, and that ability to get on the ground with you and shape it. A full manuscript, I said this the other day, it's got to be 85% publishable. I've gotten
Yes.
this down to a statistic. I tell our gatekeepers, like, don't send it to me unless it's 85% publishable. And then you're asking, but what does that mean? So to get back to I'm sorry, I always digress in my answers, but there is no one route. There are going to be agents who want to see that full manuscript, and there are going to be agents who want to see the book proposal. Sometimes it helps to write the full manuscript and then go back to the book proposal. Personally, I think a book proposal provides a very good roadmap before you go down that road.
Yeah. Terrific. Mary Jane is interested in doing uh, photographic books, and she's wondering who publishes these? Where can you publish them? I'm assuming she means traditional publishing, otherwise she
Mhm,
wouldn't be at this
mhm.
session. Are there
Yeah.
still publishers that take on that sort of work? I know production costs are
Yes, exactly.
astronomical.
Yeah. Photo-driven books, yes. I mean, there are. And I would say the gift market is actually really big right now with the publishers I do business with. Everyone's looking for a great gift book, which is great. But the costs are heavy. And so this is where your platform is going to have to really be evident and speak for itself. Um, for them to take that financial risk onto, you're going to have something that is both, is that combination of big idea and platform.
Yeah.
So
Anne Louise says, I've written numerous business articles and columns over my career as a business consultant. Does that carry any weight if I'm pitching historical fiction?
I think that any credential, if you've published at all, if you've been given attention at all, sometimes even your career can be relevant. I would say if it's just one line, maybe not. Again, some of this relies on my actually like sitting in the room with you and seeing the query, but maybe not. But for others of you, a bio is a perfectly good thing to include. So, I'd say if you're writing a novel, the only thing to really emphasize is your experience as a writer, is your bylines. Have you written somewhere notable? Have you been recently published? Have you been featured somewhere else? So that's sort of the way I would consider it.
Mhm. Terrific. Janet's wondering if you recommend sensitivity readers, and if so, how would you determine when to hire and how to find a good one?
Mm. So I wish I knew of a good one. I mean, we have interns who, they're great at that. But if you're just operating as a writer, sort of shooting in the dark, I wonder if Readsy has people. Readsy is like a site that has a lot of freelance writing and editing professionals. But yes, I do recommend doing that in advance of sharing to agents, especially if you're concerned that there's something in your manuscript that's controversial, that's going to rub someone the wrong way. You don't want to distill something down too much, but you do want to be sensitive. So I would absolutely do that. I think agents will reject it if they're really offended or alienated by your work.
I've just put a
Oh,
resource
good.
into the
Perfect.
chat that I'm aware of. And then Jennifer Wilson also recommended one that I've put into the chat if folks are looking for that sort of help. All right, let's talk about comp titles. So there were a couple people who
Uh-oh.
asked about how to research them. And I did share an article that is kind of an evergreen piece on how to get that process started.
Right.
Joanne's question is a little more specific. She says, I'm planning on using 3 comp titles in my query. 2 were published within the last 5 years. The third was published 20 years ago, but it's rather iconic in its genre. And she's wondering, will that fly if I explain the choices briefly and why my novel is a mashup of all 3?
Hmm. So usually 3 comps can be a little unwieldy in a query letter, so often I'll suggest that more in your book proposal. If this is a novel, of course, you're not trying to sell it on a proposal, so that can be tougher. I don't know, you could do 3, but again, you don't want to give too much for a mind to, you don't want to detract from someone's attention on your own work. And so it is the Hollywood language of X meets Y. If it's not evident in a quick sentence like that, if it's hard to explain, the same rule applies as query letters, right? You just don't want people to be confused. Does that answer adequately?
I think so. I have some of my own questions,
Yeah.
if I'm
Oh
allowed,
gosh, great.
because this is an area where I hear so much conflicting advice from everybody. Um, about how many. So, like, I've heard some agents say, "Oh, I'd love to see 5 or 6,"
Yeah.
and I'm like relieved to hear you say, "Oh, 3 might actually muddy the waters a little bit." And I've heard some say, if you don't choose something that's been published within the last 2 years, it's a reject. And
Mm,
I'm being a little bit extreme in these statements, but
yeah.
that's how it feels when writers see them and they get all of this anxiety about, oh no, I'm going to bomb just because I picked the wrong comp.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that funny? So I do have a line in the book about that, which is it's like an SAT test. You can afford to you can afford to you can't afford to leave it blank, but you can afford to get it wrong. And I think that if someone sees the gem, like we are experts, or we should be, in spotting the diamond in the rough. So it's like if you get your comps wrong, or it was published 6 years ago instead of five, please don't focus on these granularities. Did you do the work?
Mhm.
Did you collect the data to understand what is selling, what readers want? So it's funny you mentioned that, Jane. I mean, I think that certain agencies might ask for that at the outset. That's kind of funny to me. Most want that in your book proposal. So the query itself, I think, let's try to keep it brief. If you really are an artist, something that I have experimented with, it takes a lot of time, is like with the X of this and with the quality of that and with the themes of this, and you try to collage and really paint a picture for an editor, and that can get them really excited. But that's sophisticated, right? Like that takes
Yeah.
I you can feel free to attempt it. It just that can be trickier then too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Becca says if you're writing nonfiction, do you need to have a proposal done before writing a query or seeking an agent, or does an agent help you develop that proposal? Or I might put it exactly how polished does that proposal need to be?
Um, the 85% rule. Okay.
Okay.
No. I mean, it's I guess again, I want to relieve you that and it's hard, right? It's hard to qualify this, but agents and editors alike expect to see flaws, weaknesses. This is not going to be a perfect, perfection is the enemy of the good. So what I don't want writers to do is just belabor, freak out, freak out, and then, get paralyzed and not query, or get
Mhm.
paralyzed by the rejection, which is inevitable. So I think that you've just got to put your best foot forward, know what your weaknesses are, like anything else. I'm saying lead with your strengths, but know your weaknesses. Try to get ahead of the questions and the resistance that agents and editors are going to have. Maybe that can be more easily done in a conversation,
Mhm.
but a brilliant pitch will do that too. Example, I've self-published a book. I did it all on my own, so the sales numbers are modest, but I was able to obtain this media thing. I was able to grow
Mhm.
my email list by X. That's a perfect example of I'm upfront about the next question you're going to ask me, which is how did your self-published book perform? And I'm going to tell you like it is, but I'm going to tell you why you should take a bet on me.
Yeah. We're almost at time, so just a couple very practical questions. Lisa says if your genre is maybe like kind of in a gray area, like let's say it's realistic fiction meets women's fiction, should you say something like that or simplify, be a little more broad to avoid saying the wrong or confusing thing?
You know what? My intern was so funny the other day. She's like, why do they not have a category called men's fiction? And I was like, I'm tweeting that right now. It's so good. I think I'll do it afterward. But it's so true, right? So people have actually asked, like, is women's fiction still a thing? And this is again where we're getting lost in the weeds. We're getting lost in the weeds. Who is the agent you're querying? Does the agent say on the website, I specialize in women's fiction? Then you are going to say women's fiction. If they say commercial, you're going to say commercial. It's really about so much of life, imitation and just
Yes.
like paying attention, and so just again, like let's like give up the idea of a form letter and really think in this kind of tailored way, right? Um, so
Okay, and the last question. I like questions like this. It's probably perverse. Okay. AK says if you've had some revise and resubmit requests that end up in a no, should you talk in your query about how you had these near misses? Does that help
mm,
or does it hurt? Like I got rejected. I was really close. Someone almost
um
loved me.
Yeah, that's so funny. Like I got responses. I mean, I like the creative approach. Anything that's not the let me know is okay by me. I honestly don't think that that particular comment is a value add, right? I mean, maybe that would go better under the category of I've had a number of requests for my manuscript
Okay.
because that would be accurate,
Yes.
right? or I've had a number of conversations with agents. One of the greatest stories in this book, because these are all stories of first-time writers that I've signed, or it's all about that. And one of the authors in this book, who I call the Crusader, she said to me, I'm interviewing agents and I'd like you to be a part of that. And it was like, okay, right? And agent, right? And editors too, they like to audition, right? We want to be, we're competitive by nature, but also it just makes it's the mark of a professional that like you've lined up those interviews, right? So again, I know that this is kind of business and marketing language, and that's why this book is supposed to help you to be your own best business person. But this is the sort of strategy you should use.
Well, that's very bold advice.
It's
I like
bold.
that.
I'm interviewing.
Have confidence and do not be a supplicant. I like that.
Confidence is key. I talk about like stepping into your future self. Not, I'm hoping this book will be, this book will be, this book is. These are authoritative words, that really like they make a difference to the recipient, right? Now we're seeing a book that is, not a book that we hope will succeed.
Okay, we're at time. So I want to thank everyone for attending today and for your wonderful questions and attention. And especially thank you, Lucinda, for spending this time with us today. It's been so
Thank you.
informative and fun.
Like my ultimate goal, whether you sign with us or you query other agents, is you read the book, now you know the basics, you come in with a much stronger letter, you can ask much more sophisticated questions, because this is about you. This is not, and Jane, I know I've watched and listened and read your things, like you don't just sign on the dotted line when a publisher gives you a contract. This is an interview. You need to know that this is the person who will fight for you and shares your vision. And that's what's ultimately so important. So anyway, I'm really touched that you guys are here today, and I hope you enjoy the book. And Jane, I'm so thankful to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.